Hello and welcome to Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. This is your one-stop shop to take stock of all the progress on the political and literal battlefields. Now let's go ahead and get started. It was a big week for the Russian president. He was sworn in for yet another term in office and hosted a victory parade in Moscow, one of the most important annual celebrations in Russia.
Russia has a new tradition. For the second time in a row, one single tank took part in the victory parade in Moscow's Red Square. It's a T-34, a construction which was developed and produced in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Just like last year, the parade showcased plenty of nuclear-capable missile systems. Dear friends, Russia is now going through a difficult, critical period. The fate of the motherland, its future, depends on each of us. Today, on Victory Day, we realize this even more acutely and clearly.
Putin!
2 days before the victory parade, the new old Russian president was sworn in for his 5th term in office.
Верно служить народу.
According to official results, Putin won 87% of the vote in the presidential elections in March. The West saw the vote as unfair. The EU and US, as well as over 50 other countries, condemned the holding of the elections in occupied territories of Ukraine. After swearing on the Russian constitution, Putin gave a speech in which he blamed the West for isolation of Russia. However, later he added that dialogue with Western countries is possible, but should be on equal terms. Vladimir Putin has been in power in Russia as either president or prime minister since 1999.
Russian attacks on Ukraine continue. As Russian forces advance on the front lines, more and more people are deciding to leave their homes in eastern Ukraine. For the war-torn country, VE Day was not an easy one.
On May 8th, Ukraine marked the Day of Remembrance and victory over Nazism in World War II. But it's difficult to remember the end of a war 79 years ago, while another one is ongoing. Kharkiv is under what seems like constant attacks. Ukraine's second-largest city is facing a difficult time. No place is safe. The city of Kharkiv was hit yet again. The explosion happened at the pitch, next to the school. Unfortunately, children were outside, 3 children. All 3 were injured by the Russian missile. It will take some time before next game is played here. First, the shrapnel needs to be cleared. Children from the whole neighborhood used to hang out here, as it is the only renovated pitch here. May 8th also saw a major attack in the Kyiv region. 13 houses were destroyed. Overall, Russia launched over 50 missiles and 20 drones that night. This is how the Kremlin marks the end of World War II in Europe, with a massive attack, with its attempts to break the lives of our people, with its Nazism. This woman lived through the Second World War. Now at 86, she was forced to evacuate from her home in eastern Ukraine with just a few bags, as the Russians close in on the town.
Fighting in Ukraine does not just take place on the battlefields. Ukrainians are struggling to keep their people connected as Russia is targeting Ukrainian telecommunications infrastructure.
The infamous attack on a TV tower in Kyiv was just the beginning of the campaign to destroy Ukrainian connectivity. More than 2 years in, Ukraine estimates that it would need 10 years and over $4.5 billion to repair its telecom industry. Over the course of the Russian invasion, roughly 12% of Ukrainian households have lost mobile service connection. And it's not just missile attacks that mobile operators are facing. In December 2023, Kyivstar, Ukraine's largest mobile network operator, was targeted by a cyber attack. My connection has completely disappeared. My internet and my satellite navigation aren't working. I can't move around the city. I'm having lots of trouble, and that's why I came here to buy another SIM card from another provider, to have at least one that works.
From my perspective, what we see right now in Ukraine is the biggest cyber attack on telco infrastructure in the world.
According to Ukrainian government data, roughly 720 mobile and internet providers suffered substantial losses, with nearly 100 facing bankruptcy.
And now let's go ahead and take a look at the situation along the front lines in Ukraine. Of course, these very, very long front lines haven't changed in their length or duration. Situation down in Kherson, not much to report there. What we're going to do is focus right now on Kharkiv in the north. And if we pull up this next map, then, well, we'll show you what we're talking about. Let's see if we can get that up. All right, so the Kharkiv region, it has been reported on Friday that Russians are making advantage in the border area near Vovchansk. And it is that city where Russian forces, as of Friday, are reported to have made an incursion of about a kilometer, which is not very much. However, Vovchansk, you must remember, was a point of attack used last year by the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion, as well as the Polish Volunteer Corps, who took the fight to Russia into the Belgorod region. Russians are now coming back saying that they want to create a buffer area of about 10 kilometers wide to stop the attacks from the Ukrainian side entering into Belgorod. However, that is quite a bit of, propaganda, I think we can say. This is just another attempt by Russian forces to make an incursion into the Kharkiv area. We know that the Russians are most likely going to try and make another attempt on Kharkiv city, which is Ukraine's second largest city and a huge prize for Vladimir Putin. Down near Kupiansk, the situation is still heavy fighting going on there, but the situation along Kupiansk has still not changed. Dvorichna, the soldiers are still unable to cross the river there. Therefore, now let's go ahead and move down south to another major area along the front lines that we've been paying attention to a lot. Let's go down near Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, and to that area, if we can get this next map up there. And here we go. So the situation near Avdiivka and west of Avdiivka and Ocheretne, Russian forces continuing to push there. They have seized that village. Oh, it looks like we have a little mess up on our map. So the Russian forces seem to be flanking to the north. New York, yes, there is a New York in Ukraine, and that will be maybe a small tactical gain for Russia if they're able to capture that city. This map is incorrect. I can see at the moment they have not taken New York. And as I said, they are going to try and push northward on that flank towards Konstantinivka. The prize for the Russians are going to be Toretsk and New York. And of course, the situation near Chasiv Yar continues to unfold. Russians have yet to make it in the city. They are still on the outskirts of the city to the north. Bogdanivka has been claimed by Russian forces, and the Russian forces to the east of the city are just beyond the canal. So still no breakthrough into Chasiv Yar. There's heavy fighting going on in that area. And one theory is that the Russians could pull some troops from this front line all the way up to Chasiv Yar to try and make a breakthrough there. However, there is no such information to indicate such moves at this time. Well, now let's take a look at some horrifying images after Russian attacks on Ukraine and civilian infrastructure. And now it's that time in the program where we take a look at the war in Ukraine through a journalist's lens. But today we've got a special surprise because we have none other than Sgt Sarah Ashton here from the Armed Forces of Ukraine, who just happens to be in Warsaw after traveling back from NATO headquarters in Brussels. Sarah, thanks for joining me on Ukraine this week.
Don, a couple of weeks ago when I was talking to you from near Yar, I didn't expect to be in the studio, but being called to Brussels allowed me to get a better sense of where our partners are standing and continue to stand with us. That includes Poland, and it's great to be here in Warsaw today.
Well, welcome to Poland, of course, as always. Now, if we look at the situation along the front lines, of course, the situation down near Avdiivka, well, is particularly worrying. What is your assessment on what's going on down there?
I'm glad you brought up Avdiivka, because it's something that I brought up in Brussels at NATO headquarters. NATO is lucky to have Colonel General Syrski on their side. Colonel General Syrski, our commander-in-chief, appointed by President Zelensky to make certain that we found victory and liberty and liberation, made certain that we were strategically redeployed from Avdiivka just 4 days after he was appointed to the position of the Armed Forces of Ukraine's commander-in-chief. So every time I hear about sort of a doomsday scenario along that front, I'm not too concerned. Here's why. As long as Colonel General Syrski and President Zelensky are working together to make certain that we have what we need as NCOs, as service members, et cetera, and our officers to carry out victory, we can't look at the front lines on a day-to-day basis. We have to look at the broader picture. And no doubt, by the time President Zelensky is unveiling his peace formula and talking to the different nations about peace, Colonel General Syrski will have come up with plans, if he hasn't already, to make certain that Russia's vanquished not only in Avdiivka in that direction, but also in Yar and up towards Kupiansk, Kharkiv Oblast, and of course, Sumy.
Right, those seems to be the hottest places, and you know best, being there near Yar. Now, I've also heard from Russian military channels, which we always take with a big grain of salt, but I've heard this theory that potentially Russians could redeploy some of their assets from near Avdiivka up to Yar in an attempt to break through in that city. What are your thoughts on that?
Just a couple of days ago, it was May 9th. It was the anniversary of Russia's grand plans for Europe and their grand plans for what they had planned for Yar. And as we know from what General Budanov and others mentioned, there was this intent for Russia to grab Yar by May 9th. That date has passed, and yet Yar is still in the hands of the Ukrainian forces and will continue to be in the hands of Ukrainian forces. Less than worrying about what Russian Telegram and Mill bloggers are saying about where their troops are going, we are concerned about the terrorism that's being carried out by the Russian fascists under Vladimir Putin against the Ukrainian civilian population. We can handle ourselves on the battlefield. We will be victorious. President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula will be instituted. However, at what cost to Ukrainian lives? And this is what we try to talk to our international partners about. Worry less regarding the day-to-day on the front and more about stopping this genocide, the rape and mutilation against Ukrainian civilians by the Russian enemy.
Right, but at the same time, Ukraine has to hold the ground and be able to get to that 10-point peace plan that Zelensky is so passionate about.
But we are holding the ground, Don. Again, Russia had wanted to arrive in Yar by the 9th of May. I was there. They were talking about getting across the canal. They were talking about taking Kupiansk last August of 23. Russia's really good at talking, yet they're not so good at performing. They're great at carrying out terror, but they don't understand that the Ukrainian military is not only modern, but ready and able to push back, to hit back, and to take back whatever lands we need to when the appropriate time is there.
That is a good point that you make, and it's also true that if Russia continues on this path, well, it's going to take them decades to take the whole entire region of the Donbass, as well as hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of pieces of military equipment.
Exactly. When we saw that Russia was coming in, as you know, I had been in Kharkiv in the early days of the full-scale invasion. We pushed Russia out of Kharkiv city. We pushed them out of Kharkiv region, basically, for the most part, except for a small piece in the far northeast of the oblast. And therefore, if they couldn't do this when we didn't have the full support of our partners and we didn't have a fully professional military like we do now, it will be impossible for them to achieve their imperialistic, colonialistic goals. Hence, this is why I'm talking about the terrorism that they're carrying out against the civilians. They can't break us militarily, and they won't be able to break us as a nation. So what are they trying to do? Eradicate the Ukrainian people.
Right. Well, we're all hoping that the military equipment and support that is supposed to make it to Ukraine gets there, and Ukrainian armed forces can do as best as possible with that.
Well, thanks to the Polish people and the Polish government, we are going to stay strong. You've stood with us for a very long time throughout the entire full scale. And on behalf of all of the armed forces of Ukraine, to the Polish people, Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. Thank you very much, Sgt Sarah Ashton, for joining me on Ukraine this week. Despite the unprecedented $60 billion aid package, the Ukrainians are struggling to repel Russian attacks in eastern Ukraine. This has prompted the West to ramp up its aid efforts to its ally in need.
The war of drones continues on the Ukrainian battlefields. Perhaps no other conflict in history has seen such extensive use of drones. And it's not just large military UAVs, but also, or perhaps primarily, civilian drones that are being utilized. And for more than just monitoring enemy movements. The Ukrainians have managed to find dozens of ingenious ways to transform them into killing machines. We are installing an initiation board on the drone. This board directly detonates the projectile. It has two modes. Either it detonates the projectile when the drone is hitting an obstacle, or we can initiate via the remote control in flight, and it will explode in the air. According to the commander of Ukraine's drone forces, the country has delivered 3 times as many drones to its army so far this year as it had in the entirety of 2023. Despite this, many soldiers still feel as if more could be done. We lack drones, quality drones. We lack equipment, because most spare parts we buy ourselves and make repeaters. I made it myself. Drone operators are not the only part of the Ukrainian army which says it needs more equipment. Despite the passing of a US military aid package worth $60 billion, its impact on the battlefield has thus far been modest. The Russians seem to still have the upper hand on the battlefield and continue to record incremental territorial gains. Due to Ukraine's challenges lately, its Western allies have been ramping up their support. The UK will now allow Kyiv to launch British missiles against Russian territory. This is yet another milestone passed by the West when it comes to aid for Ukraine.
Let's be absolutely clear, Russia has launched an attack into Ukraine, and Ukraine absolutely has the right to strike back at Russia.
France, on the other hand, has once again raised the issue of possible NATO troop deployment to Ukraine. The Kremlin spokesperson said that Russia's tactical nuclear weapon drills were a response to these statements.
And now joining me here to discuss what weapons are needed in Ukraine is Tom Brewer, an American politician, a state senator from the state of Nebraska. He served in the U.S. Army for 36 years, completed 6 tours in Afghanistan, was wounded, and received 2 Purple Hearts. Tom has taken several humanitarian missions to Ukraine and has worked with the U.S. House of Representatives to provide military aid to Ukraine as well. Hello, Tom, and thank you very much for joining us, joining me on Ukraine this week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're joining us now from Kyiv, and of course, you're about to head east, I imagine, to see what the current situation is. But let's start off with the aid package as it's being supplied to Ukraine, the recent aid package that went through. And exactly which type of weapon systems do you think are the most crucial, the most, and will be the most effective for Ukraine to use?
The ones that come to mind immediately will be the ATACMS, and the fact that we're given the ATACMS that are the new generation. Before, what we have given were the ones that were at the very back of the warehouse that were about out of date, and they just didn't have the range or the accuracy that the new ones have. So that'll be key. And then resupplying HIMARS, 155 millimeter shells. And I think there will be a lot of new drone capability that will be part of the package too. Ukrainians really are leading the charge as far as the operational use of drones, the knowledge on how to modify them. And I think that it would be incredibly valuable for the United States and for NATO to have advisors or observers here learning. And I know that some countries are very skittish about having folks in the Ukraine, but unfortunately, that's where the war is, and that's where the lessons learned are. And if we don't do everything we can to learn from their experience, I believe that we're going to see a loss of life on the part of U.S. and NATO soldiers in the future because of a lack of understanding of how to fight this drone war.
Right. This war in Ukraine has totally shown us how critical drones are and how effective they can be. But concerning the sky, it's been announced that finally some of those F-16s are going to arrive in Ukraine in June and July, which could be code word for they're probably already there. What do you think that the F-16s are going to do for Ukrainian armed forces? Just how effective will they be for Ukraine?
Well, I think it'll probably be one of those things where they have to kind of tiptoe into it because they're going to have to figure out the Russian air defense. They're going to have to figure out how to deal with the Russian fast-moving aircraft also. And then I think the factor that may become the most valuable is to stop the Russians from using the glide bombs. Force them back far enough that glide bomb is no longer effective. And if we do that, I think that'll do a lot to help the front lines with the delay from when the package was approved until weapons are on the ground. That's the time they're buying right now. They're giving up space for time so that they can have what they need to fight the Russians. And sadly, we should not have had the long delay we did, and we put a lot of Ukrainian soldiers at risk because of that delay. But now that we have it and we're moving forward, they just got to figure out how to get it here as quick as they can and then get it onto the field to use.
Right. Now, I'm glad you mentioned glide bombs because there's a lot of talk about that in the media, and I also think there's a lot of false narratives going around about glide bombs. You have extensive experience with this. So tell me, what is the best way for Ukraine to defeat the glide bombs? It's not traditional air defense per se, is it?
No, it's not. The way that they use them, they come in and they'll pop up and release it, and then they'll break off and come back into Russia to prevent their aircraft from getting too far into a zone that can be hit by Ukrainian air defense. And then the bomb itself has the ability to fly and be fairly accurate. And what they've done is they've used that on the front lines to devastate their defensive positions. So it's going to have to be one of those where they figure out how to stop the glide bombs, or else they're going to end up, in a situation where they're going to have to keep moving those front lines.
Right, and it seems that I guess the way to do that is to take out the fighters that are or the bombers that are dropping these bombs. Yeah. Yeah,
but understand that there are quite a few shoulder-fired missiles on both sides of the line. And what you don't want to do is have your Ukrainian soldiers shooting down your Ukrainian aircraft because they've been so trained that if it flies, it dies, because there just hasn't been the ability for Ukraine to control the skies. And I think that's that kind of crawl, walk, run part here, because if they aren't careful about it, it'd just be tragic to lose your aircraft you waited so long for because someone didn't get the message on what the plan was on how they're going to intercept and stop these missiles and glide bombs.
Right. Now, concerning the use of tanks along the front lines, obviously we've seen thousands of Russian tanks either destroyed or captured in Ukraine. But we've also seen the use of tanks sort of kind of died down in this phase of the war, it seems at least. Maybe tanks are used to kind of fill the gap when there's a lack of artillery ammunition or other firepower available. What are your thoughts? Are tanks something that Ukraine needs right now, or should we put our focus on other types of weapons?
Well, there is a need in the sense that it's still a shock effect weapon. I mean, if you've ever gone up against a tank, there's few things that will put a bigger chill down your spine than to hear the tracks clank and that main gun fire. The problem is that with the drone war, they have almost nullified the tank in many ways. And as a result of that, I mean, if I was doing the biggest bang for the buck, I would focus more on drones than I would tanks, because I think that there's a better investment there. And right now, they need to figure out how to fight a defensive war, and the drones work better for that. Tanks are becoming too easy to hit with the Lancet drones, and I think that if I was the one making the decisions, I would focus a lot more on the technology in the drones than I would on main battle tanks.
Right. Now, Tom, you've been on humanitarian missions in the past there in Ukraine. Tell me, what are some of the biggest impressions that seeing this war unfold over time has put on you?
Well, we've done a variety of things. We've been to the field hospitals to see some of the injured there. We have kind of run the area between the Russian lines and the Ukrainian lines to villages where the elderly have been trapped because of the war and having nothing. They don't have a car, they have no money, so they just somehow survive. And I sometimes scratch my head wondering how on earth they do it. The ability of them to survive and to have the spirit where they want to be Ukrainian, they want to be free, and if it costs them their life, then they're willing to do that. You know, there's nowhere I've ever been, Iraq, Afghanistan, anywhere where you have that kind of spirit. And so that part of it is almost refreshing and recharging, and it's what makes you want to come back and help them, because they have an appreciation for freedom because they've lived under communism, and we don't have that in America. Unfortunately, we've always enjoyed freedom, so we simply take it for granted and don't appreciate it. And so when I come over and I see that, I think it just recharges my battery with a passion to want to be here and help them in any way I can.
Yes, it is indeed significant to see that. I also was too impressed by that. It was, during my time in Ukraine. The will to fight and the will to persevere and protect the homeland is, well, bar none, the finest I've ever seen in my life. So now, concerning the aid that's been given to the U.S., I mean, that's fantastic. It was a little too late. We all know that. Probably cost some lives. But moving forward, I know we have an election year coming up, and that'll probably, well, play some influence as to the next round of weapons package for Ukraine. But I guess, first of all, what are some of the big misconceptions in the United States? Do the Americans understand this is a good deal for the U.S. Taxpayer to let the Ukrainians fight the war and to give them American-made weapons? It's not like a huge cash transfer. Do you think that that point needs to get out a little bit more to American people, or what are your thoughts?
It absolutely does. You're spot on, because our problem is there are senators and congressmen that are making decisions about whether to give aid or not that really do not have an appreciation, an understanding of the culture, the people, the history, and they're doing it off emotion. And the press in America has done a poor job of educating the American public on the war. It has faded from the headlines. It has faded from the discussions. And so in many ways, there are folks that think that the war for the most part is over, or it's a position where it can never go any other direction. So why should we support it? And I just think that's part of what my charge here is. Sunday we'll go forward to Kharkiv, and then we are still going to run the line all the way down to Zaporizhia, and then all the way over to Odessa. And each place we go, we're going to try and tell stories about what's happening there, and make sure that when we're all done and we can come back, not only can we share with the American press, but also with Congress, the story of what's happening. And so we can kind of make sure that if they're making decisions about the future of the Ukraine, they're making it with a good understanding and an education of what the situation truly is.
Certainly. Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for doing that. Good luck to you. Stay safe. You're a great friend of Ukraine, and thank you very much, Tom Brewer, for joining us here on Ukraine this week. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Ukrainian special services say they prevented a Russian plot to kill several top Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky himself. The assassinations were meant to be an inauguration gift for Vladimir Putin.
The SBU, which is Ukraine's security service, claims Russia tried to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky, the head of the SBU itself, Vasyl Malyuk, and the head of the HUR, Kyrylo Budanov, along with other high-ranking officials. Ukraine revealed the alleged plot around the time of VE Day. 80 years ago, millions of Ukrainians fought to defeat Nazism forever. But today, Ukrainians are again standing up to evil, which has revived, came again, and wants to destroy us again. It's an army of a fiend that is murdering, torturing, sweeping peaceful cities and villages off the face of the earth. The evil is called Russian fascism. Short version is RF. The SBU did not reveal all the exact details of what the assassinations were meant to entail. What is known, however, is that Russia was allegedly been trying to recruit hitmen among Zelensky's bodyguards. According to the SBU, Kyrylo Budanov was to be killed by Russia before Easter. An agent was supposed to locate him and guide a lethal missile strike. The network, whose activities were supervised by the FSB from Moscow, included 2 UDO colonels who leaked classified information to Russia. Thus, the enemy was actively developing plans to eliminate President Volodymyr Zelensky. One of the most important tasks of the FSB's intelligence network was to find perpetrators among the military close to the president's security detail who could take the head of state hostage and then kill him. According to Ukrainian services, President Volodymyr Zelensky has been Russia's #1 target since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Wow, this certainly isn't the first time Russians have tried to assassinate or kill President Zelensky. It certainly is the most recent. And now joining me to discuss is John Sweet, a retired U.S. military intelligence officer, former chief of staff at the Intelligence Directorate, U.S. European Command, who is also a contributor to New York Post, The Hill, and Kyiv Post, among others. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us today on Ukraine This Week.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me back on the show.
Yes. Now, this latest plot to assassinate Volodymyr Zelensky, President Volodymyr Zelensky, I mean, it's certainly not surprising that the Russians would still try to attempt such missions, but it is surprising that he did kind of reach the inner circle of President Zelensky. So first of all, I guess, what are your overall thoughts on the news of this plot?
Yeah, so my overall thoughts are this: it's not the first time he's been targeted for assassination. From his advisors or from the office there for President Zelensky, it's at least a dozen attempts. And I would say that the most recent before this was the ballistic missile bombing that occurred in Odessa as Zelensky was escorting the Prime Minister of Greece through that city. So there have been people that are tracking him in what we call, at least in the Army, the insider threat. So there still remains an insider threat that's exploitable and vulnerable, and that the Russian forces, the FSB, are looking for to get that information, to track his whereabouts so that they can put people in the right place to take him out, or to take out other leaders, as you said, the General Budanov, and then also the leader there for the SBU, Malyuk. Both of them were targets, and that's the first time they've gone after multiple targets outside of possibly Budanov's wife, who allegedly was poisoned in March also. So it's their tradecraft is what they do. It's just and they're not gonna let up.
Right. Now, what does President Zelensky do in this situation? Because, I mean, what first comes to your mind is, okay, I got to change a lot of people, right? But in doing so, I would imagine there are some inherent risks in doing that and not fully knowing who you're replacing them with. So how will President Zelensky face those challenges?
Well, it begins first with a robust counterintelligence network that they have within their organizations. And apparently it was successful to identify these two colonels and preempted a possible assassination attempt. So on that level, it's successful. On the other level, they have to really emphasize a program that the United States uses, which is called TARP, Threat Awareness and Reporting Program. And we did this shortly after the shootings there at Fort Hood, Texas, if you recall, in 2011, but identifying insider threats and making people aware of what it looks like and how to report them. But that's a start, but the counterintelligence services within the military intelligence and also within their special intelligence services there is going to be critical to maintain the safety of the president.
Now, I would imagine that the U.S. is also somewhat involved in assisting Ukraine in these matters. We've heard of reports from the New York Times that the CIA is definitely present in Ukraine. But without going into too much detail, I mean, would you imagine that the U.S. could provide some assistance to Ukraine and help with such threats like these?
Sure. The U.S. intelligence architecture can do a number of things, and I wouldn't doubt that they are supporting, from that perspective, coverage, if you will, on threats against Ukrainian leadership. So I wouldn't put that. I wouldn't discount that. So we have intelligence sharing agreements with many countries, and I'm sure there's some type of bilateral intelligence sharing agreement for certain subjects, and I imagine the security of the president of Ukraine would be one of those subjects.
Right. So, okay. So if we're Russia, if we're Vladimir Putin, let's say the assassination of President Vladimir Zelensky, although that would be a really big deal, exactly what do you think that it would achieve for Russia? Would it somehow decapitate Ukraine in a way that Russia would just walk in and take over, or is that just a complete fallacy?
I think from Russia's perspective, that's what they would like to think. The president Zelensky is very charismatic. He has this unique ability to rally the soldiers, to rally his countrymen. I mean, he started off this campaign by saying, "I don't need a ride. I need ammunition," and that was a rally point for Ukrainians. He's brought nationalism and just to the Ukrainian people. So, from the Russian perspective, he's a nuisance because he is getting support from the West. He is working NATO and individual countries for support. He is conducting deep strikes. He is conducting cross-border operations, or at least supporting anti-Putin forces in those particular operations. So no, Russia thinks that if they decapitate him, that possibly they may be able to get Ukraine to come to the negotiation tables. But I think the secession of authority within Ukraine is sufficient and established that wouldn't happen. It would just be, as we say in the United States, next man up, and they continue the mission.
Right. At the same time, though, we are seeing President Volodymyr Zelensky make some major changes across the line in his administration, sacking several, of course, we've seen over the past 2 years. I mean, ranging from ministers, corruption scandals. I mean, there's all kinds of people. And just this week, there are several people in state security services and others that have been replaced or removed. And also the war being so difficult as it is, so many people dying in this war, defending their country, but yet I imagine domestically, even probably President Zelensky can have his opponents or competitors or maybe even enemies. How about protection from something that is born from within? Is that more difficult?
It can be. It's going to be harder to identify because these are people within your own country, within your own administration, which is why that insider threat is so difficult and so hard to work with, and it's so hard to identify. But there are indicators. There are plenty of case studies out there, at least on the U.S. side, that we teach our soldiers about what certain things look like. So no, there's pressures within the administration. There's probably pressures within the governance there and within the military to go faster, to win. There's probably a side that says maybe we should compromise, with another side that says not at all. So internally, he has a lot to manage, and what he needs to surround himself with are people that have a similar line of thought, not necessarily yes men, but people that support him and people who would provide him fresh ideas on the way in which they go about accomplishing their mission. Right now, accomplishing their mission is to restore the territorial integrity of the country and to get the Russians out of Ukraine, to include Crimea.
Right, certainly. Now, I want to back up to that incident in Odessa. You know, we constantly see President Zelensky meeting with various officials from various countries, usually coming to Kyiv and meeting with the president. But let's just, if we can go hypothetical for just a second, what if a leader, a prime minister from a NATO country would be visiting with President Zelensky and was killed in an attack? What would the response be in a situation like that?
Well, I think there's two trains of thought. The first train of thought is this is a NATO leader, and that country, that NATO country, could go to NATO headquarters and ask for Article 5 to be invoked. The other argument from the other side would be it's a combat zone and they put themselves at risk. So I understand both arguments, but it's a very dangerous game to be targeting leadership from other countries, particularly NATO countries. And of course, we don't know for certain if it was a deliberate strike, but the proximity where the missiles fell and where the convoy was at the time leads you to believe that they were actively being targeted and that somebody was given that information, that targetable information, to Russian forces who used it.
Certainly, I had those same thoughts when that happened. Well, John Sweet, retired U.S. military intelligence officer, thank you very much for joining me today on Ukraine This Week. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me back.
And that's all the time we have on the show this week. Tune in again on Saturday, and if you ever miss an edition, you can find it on YouTube. We'll see you again coming up next week. Goodbye.